Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, you probably haven't seen me before. I'm usually the man behind the curtain. My name is Camille Johnson. I am the marketing coordinator here at All Seasons Wealth. Thank you guys for joining us today at our cybersecurity webinar. If you've come for the webinar, you are in the right place, so that's a good thing. Our guest speaker today is Jessica Rice. She is the Business and Information Security Lead over at Raymond James. So she'll be covering a number of topics today, including common cyber threats, how to protect your information, and a whole lot more. We will plan on saving about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining us. And Jessica, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Camille. I'm super excited to be here today talking about cyber. We definitely like this topic, of course, at Raymond James, because it's super important to not only understand kind of what the cyber landscape looks like, what types of threats that we're all up against from a personal level to a professional level, and really understand kind of the root behind some of the scams that we see in the news, some of the common things that we can watch out for and better educate ourselves on to boost our cyber hygiene as a whole. And then, after I sufficiently scared you all, we'll go through the Raymond James information security strategy, what we're doing at Raymond James to protect your information, to protect your assets, some of the key capabilities that we have that you may be familiar with, you may already be using, but if you're not, then strongly considering that with the new information that we share today regarding some of the ways to make it a little bit easier to keep yourself more secure. We'll also go through recommendations. We're strong proponents of, upping your cyber hygiene in your personal life and bringing that to your professional lives as well. And then, of course, the Q&A section, which we can make super conversational as much as possible, and definitely feel free to type in the Q&A box at any point of the presentation, and we'll go through all of those at the end. And even if you have personal anecdotes as to specific cyber situations that you found yourself in or a friend or family member has, I think oftentimes when we have these conversations, we feel as if, it'll never happen to me. And what we find out is it's actually more common than we think, and it's actually happening on a larger scale than we may even realize. So it's always important to share those stories as well. So it seems like every day in the news, there's some new headline around cyber. I know recently with artificial intelligence and that kind of race to market with all of the different solutions available, there's an increase in interest in technology and in what that means for cyber criminals and how they may utilize that technology. We also often look towards IT headlines as well when there's a large-scale ransomware incident or when a company that's reputable or well-known is taken offline for a few days. And oftentimes these articles, these headlines can seem super overwhelming, very scary, and are naturally sensationalized, right? And that's one of the key takeaways here today that I hope you leave with is cyber can seem like a completely different language, but in reality, some of the fundamentals of the nature of incidents, the nature of why cyber attacks can be successful are very easily preventable, and also important to understand some of that terminology so that we can sift through some of the dramatization or sensationalized news that we hear that is often designed to incite fear or apprehension and make us feel like, if we're not technical, then there's nothing really that we can do. And that's simply not true. So what is the general landscape and what does it look like? I've included some interesting stats here today that I think always jump out at me. One is that we are seeing unprecedented levels of cyber activity year over year. So it's not just in your minds that we're constantly seeing more headlines, that cyber is a hot topic. It will continue to be so because cyber criminals are so successful when it comes to their attacks. What we're going to hone in on is one particular flavor of cyber attack, and that's of course the one that financial services deals with the most often. So of course there's all ranges of cyber criminals, whether they are loan operators, cyber criminal groups, nation state threat actors that are backed by their governments. With financial services, what we likely deal with the most often, which may not come as a surprise, right, is the monetarily motivated cyber criminal. And that's going to differ from the ones that are looking to create political espionage or to attack infrastructure, national infrastructure. Those motives are a little bit different. So why are our cyber criminals monetarily motivated, and why do we see them disproportionately more than other incentives for criminal activity? Because financial services is where the money is. So that's helpful for us to know when we are in the financial services space, when you are thinking about how do I secure my financial accounts better, knowing that the ultimate goal is for that cyber criminal to move money out of your account into an account that they manage, knowing that we can instill different roadblocks at different levels of that process that they would need to take. And we can consider what are some of the important elements of where we should best protect and gear our energy towards protecting our financial accounts. So the activity is increasing. That's largely in part by how our constant new technology and new features and functionality globally, right, creates more opportunity for cyber criminals. Of course, we as clients are looking at the latest feature and ability to do business much easier. Oh, we no longer have to type in a password, or we're now able to link accounts from one account to another. We're looking at that thinking, great, that makes my day-to-day so much easier. Cyber criminals are not happy that we're benefiting from new features and functionality. They're excited about the opportunity to exploit new technology in ways that previously haven't been, in order to, and in our case, commit financial fraud. We're also seeing that globalization and the borderless business adding complexity into our product lines and growing internationally. So, as technology becomes more advanced and it feels less user-friendly, cyber criminals can then capitalize on some of the more socially engineered components of where we as regular individuals may interface with some of the accounts that we have. We're seeing more technology move into the cloud, which is a whole new frontier. I mean, that's relatively, that's been happening for quite some time, but definitely becoming more mainstream. And we're also seeing organized crime more organized and online than ever. So it isn't always the case that it's that sole individual in the basement of their mom's house, right, typing away on a keyboard like the movies show us. Oftentimes, what we've understood about cyber criminal, or come to understand about cyber criminal groups, is they're super organized. In a lot of cases, being a cyber criminal is their 9 to 5. They clock on, they clock off, they are out for their nation's holidays, whichever that may be. And they have organizational structures. So they may have analysts, middle management, senior management, and it's very much a well-oiled machine. They hire and fire, right, just as any other enterprise might. Cyber espionage isn't just in a movie script anymore. That's again where we see sometimes impacting the financial services industry, but not always targeting us. Those, misinformation campaigns and capitalizing on social unrest, right, in one nation for another nation's gain. A couple of stats I want to call out here. So 100,000 attackers attempt to initiate more than 100,000 telephone-oriented attacks every day. That's a lot of calls. Why is that so high? Well, how easy is it for that to happen? That's fairly low level of sophistication. You don't need a coding background. You don't need super technology prowess to be able to initiate hundreds of thousands of calls. Some of these mass or the high volume type attacks that we see can be very low level of sophistication. Malicious URLs are 3 to 4 times more common than malicious attachments. It's significantly easier for a cyber criminal to inject a website into an email and say, hey, click on this link to view your package confirmation. You click on that link, it prompts you to log in to what you think is FedEx.com. And what you don't realize is they have created a fake website that looks like FedEx. that prompts you to log in. They then have your credentials and they can then utilize that later down the line. So URLs and avoiding clicking on unfamiliar links is always going to be a best practice and something to watch out for, but it can be a habit that's hard to break. So one of the key threats that cyber criminals will use time and time again is phishing. And if you're unfamiliar with phishing, phishing is a type of social engineering. And social engineering really relies on the human element of any fraud, right? That human error, human emotion, trusting another individual that they are who they say they are, human emotion, wanting to help someone who's in need or respond to a sense of urgency. All of that is that social engineering component, because they know, cyber criminals know, that targeting a human and getting that human to provide them information is much easier than brute forcing their way into a network that may have a ton of security controls in place. It's a lot easier to get that information handed to them by an individual. So phishing is social engineering over email. And email will always be popular for this, from the stance of, if I could see anybody's hands raised, which I know I can't, but if anybody were to raise their hand and tell me if they don't have an email address, I doubt that we would see any hands raised, right? Because email is such a pervasive form of communication, especially in the workplace. And knowing that, cyber criminals continually favor that channel, though we have seen popularity in smishing, SMS phishing, so text-based campaigns, or vishing, which we'll cover in a little bit. But email is one of the number one threat vectors that a cyber criminal will use to deploy phishing campaigns. Phishing is always a request for information, or at least a hook that gets you to provide additional information. There's typically an ask, or the red flag being a call to action in some way. So what are some of the red flags that we've already covered? So one would be sense of urgency, right? Is your boss telling you that they need something ASAP? Is a website that you favor when you are online shopping telling you that you'll miss out on a 50% off site-wide deal if you don't click the link and download the discount code right now? Sense of urgency gets an individual, a human, to say, oh, I need to respond right now, and potentially ignore some of the red flags that may be going off in your head saying, hey, I've never been asked this by Jessica before, or this doesn't really make sense. I don't have an account with PayPal, so I'm not sure why they're telling me to reset my account, right? That sense of urgency they try to use to basically get you to ignore some of those skeptical thoughts that you may have. Person of authority, same thing. Oftentimes we see cyber criminals pose as your boss, the CEO of a major company. And, there's been many successful cases in which somebody lower on the totem pole, whether it be an intern at a company, thinks that it's their lucky day and their CEO is messaging them for a request. Maybe it's to purchase a gift card. When they go to hand that gift card, or when they go to validate that with somebody else, they're met with question marks, and people don't have any idea what they're talking about, because that person of authority, again, is meant for you to design to not ask questions, respond quickly, and just provide them with what they're asking for. Uncommon language or spelling errors, that used to be pretty much face value. What you see is what you get. Now we're seeing cyber criminals get a little bit more sophisticated, and they're more easily able to blend into the English language. We used to see, very clear typos or phrasing that just is not something that we would use as primarily English speakers. What we see here, and which is still helpful, is you may be communicating with somebody every day, whether they're a close colleague or a good friend of yours, and there's typical ways in which you address each other, sign off, inquire about how you're doing, and that person's tone or the types of wording that they may use will drastically change. A lot of the times when we're talking to individuals that either were able to identify a phishing attempt or may have even fallen victim, we get that response of, it didn't seem right. It didn't seem quite like Jessica and how she typically reaches out to me, but I was having a busy day. I was running late to a meeting, and I just provided a response. So that uncommon language, you yourself, as somebody who has, if you have an established relationship with that individual, are the best line of defense in order to kind of ring those alarm bells when something doesn't seem right. The other thing is there's sometimes technical red flags that come into play. If an email that you receive comes from jessicarice@raymondjames.com, and you go to reply and it autocorrects to x23@comcast.net, then you should notice that that email address is changing, and think twice about what you're sending, because oftentimes cyber criminals can actually pose as or spoof a legitimate phone number or email address to make it look like it's coming from a legitimate sender when it's not. So here you see two examples of phishing emails. One is from Geek Squad, which you'll notice has no URL, right? Because cyber criminals are understanding at this point that when you see a link within an email that you're unfamiliar with and you're not really sure why you would be receiving it, seeing a link is often that red flag and indicator of, oh, they want me to click on something, and if I'm unfamiliar, I won't do it. What they're trying to do is lower your kind of lines of defense and have you unaware, and basically say, hey, we've given you a charge to your account. If there's anything up with this charge, or if you feel that it's been improperly assigned to you, then please call our help desk. So you think, great, that isn't a relationship that I have. I shouldn't be paying Geek Squad $417. And you then go to call that number. What you don't realize is that number is managed by the adversary and not a legitimate help desk number. So that said, they then can request that you take any action, that you open your bank account to see whether the charge actually hit. They can assist you by remoting onto your device. And then from there, they have control and are able to gather information about your device or your account. So one is that call to action saying, call this number if there are any issues, and they purposely create an issue in which you would call. What's a simple way to avoid the success of this scam? Let's say you get a Geek Squad email in this example. You think to yourself, this is not a charge I should have. Instead of calling that number within that email, going to the official website, geeksquad.com or whatever it may be, and going to that help desk's number and calling from there. It takes an extra minute out of your day, but it saves so much heartache and so much time if you were to accidentally call an adversary and provide information. The other email that you see here is a fake Gmail alert. So of course it looks relatively legitimate. It was going to an individual named John Podesta. This was a real phishing email. If you're familiar with that name, he was pretty influential in a few presidential campaigns past. And he received an email from what he thought was Google that says, we've seen that somebody has tried to log into your Google account. Please reset your password. So he clicked on that change password link within that email. He was navigated to what looked like a legitimate password reset site where it said, please enter your existing password and a new password. So he entered his existing password, he entered a new password, he clicked save. Well, what do we think happened? Nothing, right? Other than that his existing password was captured by the adversary. They were then able to use his password. They obviously had his Gmail address, and they were then able to compromise his Gmail account. And email, of course, how many other accounts do we have linked to our email? So, fortunately, there are two different options that we can take to mitigate that type of threat. One would be exactly similar to Geek Squad, taking that extra minute to navigate directly to your Gmail settings, your privacy and security settings, and resetting your password from there instead of the link within the email, or multi-factor authentication. And that's something that will come up throughout this conversation, because if there's one thing that you take away from the call, it's definitely considering adding multi-factor authentication to your other accounts across your life, right? Your cyber portfolio. Multi-factor authentication is an additional layer of security beyond your username and password. So it's something you have, like a token, physical, or something you are, like a biometric, or something like a PIN, a passcode. So if John were to have a multi-factor layer of authentication on top of his Gmail account, if he had that option toggled on, and that's an option across all of our online accounts at this point, he then would have unfortunately provided his username and password, but that cyber criminal wouldn't have then been able to successfully authenticate or log into his account, because once they entered that username or password, they would have been prompted to provide or enter the PIN that was sent to it's often your mobile device. So that second layer of authentication is a huge line of defense against common account compromise where you've accidentally provided your password, because we're not perfect and it may happen where we're having a busy day and maybe we're not thinking very closely about what the ask is and we accidentally provide information we shouldn't. If you have multi-factor authentication, it will then prevent that compromise in many, many cases. The other type of social engineering that has become more commonplace is phishing and spam calls. I mean, how many of us have gotten a call from the Social Security Bureau, right? We know that they don't actually call, right? And that's something that we're pretty well adjusted to. Robocalls, where we get them, you just hang up. But spam calls can be very problematic for some individuals that receive them more often than not. You can see here that it's the #1 complaint that the Federal Communications Commission receives. Of course, that's a nuanced issue because we have legitimate robocalls that are meant to send or that are designed to help us or give us appointment updates or letting us know that a prescription is filled, right? Those are legitimate cases in which we would allow robocalls. And there is generally an effort to add more security around people that are calling us. That's why you'll occasionally see suspicious caller or likely spam when you get a phone call, because cell phone carriers and phone providers are trying to do better at indicating to their customer base when the call may not be legitimate and they may fall victim. Doesn't matter for cyber criminals because they will continue to try to pretend to be reputable companies, whether stealing their phone number or otherwise. So phishing is that voice phishing, request for information over the phone. And that is, an interesting topic to think about. If somebody were to call you up and say, hey, I'm your grandchild, right? And I'm in jail. We've seen a lot of those grandchildren type fraud in which the cyber criminal will unfortunately call or text or email a grandparent and pose as the grandchild, saying that they are in dire need of assistance, whether it be financially to post bail, or they're in the hospital and they need to pay a hospital bill. They're relying on that human emotion of that grandparent to be scared for their grandchild and not think twice about the request and call in, right? So, understanding and thinking twice of, okay, this is a number I don't recognize. It's not in my contacts, or this doesn't sound like the person that I believe to be calling. Or even if you're not sure, but the request is just a little too urgent or a little too out of the blue, hanging up and then calling back that official number or verifying by somebody else. So oftentimes cyber criminals will, in that case of that grandchild scam, say, please don't tell my mom or dad, right? I'm in serious trouble and I just need this bail to be posted. Well, when that grandparent has validated with an outside person, in a lot of cases that their child, right, the mother or father will respond back and say, he's sitting right next to me, right? And then you're able to confirm that that's not a legitimate scam. And, it's unfortunate because obviously cyber criminals are looking to hit you where it hurts or to get you feeling, heightened feelings of fear or anger, right? So that you do provide that information. So they will stoop low when it comes to the story that they are telling. So it's important to be aware that those types of scams exist so that we're more able to watch out for them if we feel that it's happening to us or somebody that we know. Romance scams are huge as well. If you're getting a Facebook message from somebody who just wants to talk and is feeling lonely, right? That should be an indicator that they may not be who they say they are. Yes, they may have profile pictures that look like a legitimate person. They may be posting statuses and very active online, but if a stranger is contacting you over the internet, that should be a red flag that you may need to do some validation before you continue to converse or communicate with them. The other type of threat that we see a lot of is obviously malware, and a flavor of that is ransomware. So malware is a type of malicious software. It can get onto your device through many different channels. It could be through what appears to be a phishing email, like the examples that we saw in the previous slide, in which if you were to click that link, it wouldn't take you to a fake browser. It may take you to an error page, but what you don't know is malware has downloaded onto your device unbeknownst to you. Or it could be ransomware, which is essentially a malware that encrypts your device and locks you out of it, so that you are more likely to pay the cyber criminal to restore your information. So a key piece to think about when talking about ransomware is how are you backing up your data? Because what we found is whether it be ransomware, whether it be a malicious intent that you lose your data, or whether it be a true accident and you spill coffee on your device tomorrow, where is your data stored and would you be able to recover it? If you are backing up your data regularly and a cyber criminal were to lock you out of your computer, then you wouldn't have to communicate with that cyber criminal or even entertain the idea of paying for that ransom if you knew you were able to restore your data from a backup. So definitely think about, what you would lose if your computer were to break tomorrow, and if there were any data backup options that you can take that would help kind of mitigate that risk. Colonial Pipeline is the top right-hand image here, and that was, I think, maybe it was a little bit more than a year ago at this point that they were hit by a massive ransomware incident in which they were taken offline for multiple days, and that contributed to their, a national pipeline within the United States, and that contributed to an increase in gasoline prices. So when companies are hit by ransomware, especially infrastructure, that has oftentimes downstream effects. Why is ransomware so popular? You see in the bottom right hand a picture of a race car, and you're probably thinking, why is that here in a cyber presentation? This is actually the leader of one of the top cyber criminal groups who is known for their successful ransomware attacks. Why do they continue to do that? It's fairly profitable, right? They're making a ton of money from that because people may be more likely to pay ransom than either A, admit that they were a victim of a cyber crime, or B, lose the data that is of importance to them that they are not able to recover because they didn't proactively back up data. So all of those threats really boil down to electronic fraud in our space. And AI, we'll talk a little bit about that, definitely adds a different layer, right, in validating the person on the other end of the call. We used to see AI and the type of deep fake in which publicly available audio or video could be loaded into a program and then manipulated so that a person, typically it was a celebrity just because there was a lot of content online, would then be manipulated by that whoever had owned that software to say or appear doing any number of things. So AI definitely adds that level of needing to validate and likely finding an alternate means of validation. If you are being contacted by someone, if the language sounds very clear, right? Let's say AI is used to analyze your email correspondence with me, for example, and they are then able to create an email that sounds exactly like something that I would reach out to you for, that then provides a second layer of legitimacy that may not have been there, where red flags may have been more easily found. But that second element of validation will always hold true, right? At the end of the day, because they're monetarily motivated, that request will ultimately lead to a request for information, and you'll still be able to confirm or potentially have that red flag to say, this is not something Jessica has asked me for. So something to keep in mind. And then even outside of cybercrime, generative AI chatbots, all of that needs to be taken with a grain of salt at this point in time, because we've seen time and time again that the information provided is not always 100% accurate, and that how information is stored within those programs is not always as properly protected as even the company that owns the ability is able to or would like to operate at that level. So avoiding providing any personal information within any AI solution, and really thinking through the emails that you're receiving, the general outreach that you're receiving for different signs of financially motivated fraud, especially in our space. So what are we doing to protect your information at Raymond James? So at Raymond James, we have a 4-pillar information security strategy. And as technology evolves, the strategy really remains the same, because what we believe is focusing on the fundamentals of cyber will ultimately secure us from some of the foundational concerns that don't change regardless of what flavor of technology is being used. So the first component is protection, right? We need to make sure that we have the best solutions available to properly protect your data, your assets. Oftentimes those solutions are overlapping in capabilities. So we'll have multiple alerting solutions in place, multiple, antivirus or malware sniffing or scanning solutions in place as well. And then we're constantly evaluating those to better understand, is it still working for us? Is there something better out there? And talking with other vendors, right, to make sure that we have the best security stack available. The other piece of any good security strategy is assuming that it will fail. And that's where detection comes into play. If you assume that your technology stack will work 100% of the time in exactly the way intended and catch 100% of the scams or the cyber threats, then unfortunately, you may let a few things fall through the cracks, because cyber criminals are often monitoring or modifying how they are attacking enterprises, individuals, in order to go undetected. So detection, especially real-time detection, is key. We have, for example, different alerts tied to client access, which is obviously where you're able to, look at your accounts and look at your information to better understand how legitimate users are operating on those sites and alert on the activity that we don't think is common. For example, are we seeing cases where there's, 1,000+ login attempts to client access at 2 a.m, right, where we typically don't see that? That should then be brought to our attention, to a cybersecurity professional's attention, to take a look and see whether that traffic is all legitimate or whether there may be a cyber attack at play. The other component is development of building trusted relationships, of better understanding how advisors and clients utilize technology, the types of activities that they're doing, so that the IT organization can create solutions that are secure, but that are also efficient, and better understand what would be, right, something worth alerting on. We also hire great talent that is oftentimes previously affiliated with a military entity or has extensive, government organization related experience, or that are, that next generation that grew up with technology, that have a passion for coding and that have a passion for threat hunting, and ensuring that at the end of the day, beyond our technology solutions, we have that cybersecurity expertise in-house through our humans, right, that can have eyes on glass and can sometimes fill in the blanks that technology simply cannot. And then that last component is partnership. So it's always interesting, right? Because technology is a key place where financial services compete less with each other, right? In that, one traditional competitor of Raymond James is oftentimes we have a vested interest. We're fighting the same war, right? When it comes to cyber fraud and cyber criminal activity, in that if a competitor is seeing a type of attack on their network, we may be receiving that same thing, and it would benefit both of us to share information with the types of attacks that they're seeing, the types of attacks that we're seeing, and then be able to cross contaminate and essentially provide that defense or improve that defense based on that information. So we're part of many information sharing organizations. We also continue to have a college pipeline program to get the best talent in order to continue to expand and improve our information security organization as a whole. So here you can see our defense in depth in play. So this is where we talk about that overlapping technology solutions. One of our key benefits and information sharing components is understanding how the adversary operates, how they think, and the tools that they use. Some of their techniques, tactics, and procedures. I've said that before. That's a common source of or wealth of information for us. One that we found or a takeaway that we know to be true is cyber criminals are going to look for the easiest way into your network. So we make it a point to make it as hard as possible, multiple hoops and multiple layers of defenses for a cyber criminal to get through. And even then, that core is incident response, which is cybersecurity professionals, eyes on glass, looking at all of the traffic that is inbound to our network and giving extra attention to things that just don't sit right. Here you can see that in play with our email, this defense in depth. We talked about email being a primary threat vector. You can see here that all of our technology solutions plus our cyber professionals equate to us weeding out about, our users receiving only about 1/4 of the email that that are inbound to their inboxes at any given quarter. So we're weeding out so much suspicious or known malicious content through all different avenues, which is, when we have these conversations, why we talk, why it's so important for you as clients or even managing our own personal emails to understand that we're much more likely to receive a spam or suspicious email in a personal email account than we would a work-related account, because oftentimes that work-related email has so much technology investment to purposely remove those threats. Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, of course, is striving to do that as well. They just are not doing it as much of an effective level as an enterprise can in managing their work emails. So we're more likely to see the cases in which a client's email is compromised. That client, with their compromised email, the adversary then sends an email to an advisor pretending to be that client, and then we have to make sure that we're able to appropriately catch it in time. So taking a look at your personal email defenses is a huge way to reduce that risk for you, and also know that a lot of what we're receiving, we're weeding out. But of course, we won't block legitimate client emails, and therefore, if a legitimate account is compromised, that's something that will always be a factor. Our cybersecurity professionals, I talked a lot about them. A large piece of that is made up by the Cyber Threat Center, which is a group of our incident responders, among other activities like threat hunting within our network, intelligence sharing, vulnerability management, and they are looking at our network and the traffic 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We have 3 different locations purposely placed in different time zones so that when one team goes to sleep, another one is up monitoring our network. And they are often the people that are able to escalate and take action to take down domains by partnering with government agencies or law enforcement, right? Packaging up any evidence that we find of cybercriminal activity so that they can take that proactive and more offensive measure, because here, of course, we're focused on just defending our information and leaving that to law enforcement. So a couple of the things that you can utilize, one would be obviously enhanced authentication for client access. So this is something that you should all be involved in at this point in time, in that we mandate multi-factor authentication across all client access accounts. We do this because we've seen multi-factor to be such a huge defense against account compromise. You see that through, a text message that you can get or a phone call that will validate, and you can also remember your particular devices. So this is a mandatory feature because of its importance, but as you think about this, definitely extend that to other areas and other accounts that you use throughout your day. The other piece is that within Client Access is Client Access Vault, which is our secure file sharing solution. One of the things I always recommend is establishing certain processes between you and your advisor, and thinking about how much email is kind of that primary vector, thinking about ways that you can remove sensitive information or your sensitive information out of email correspondence. Why utilize an unmanaged personal email if you can utilize a Raymond James functionality that we're already investing significant amount of time, effort to secure and make sure that those offerings are compliant, that we're able to appropriately supervise them. It's all baked in already. So one of the examples or suggestions I give is you can set up potentially a process in which you say to your advisor, hey, I will only ever upload my personal or sensitive information directly to Vault where you can access it on my account. If you see that through email, that should then serve as a red flag that maybe my email has been compromised. So you can set up like I never or I will always statements that then create that circle of trust when you have those established in place, so that, let's say I'm your advisor, I can then say, Jessica has never sent me an email that says sensitive social security number in her email before, but I know that it's in Vault. This may serve as an onus for me to give her a call and see what's going on. So highly recommend the use of Vault. And then we have a couple of other key protective measures that I would definitely encourage you taking. One of which is passwords, right? Making sure that they're secure, that they're strong. And how do we do that? By creating unique passwords across each account and by the length. And what we've seen is that length is a key determinant in how strong a password is. Obviously, special characters and numbers and uppercase and lowercase, that does help strengthen a passcode. But you can see here, even if it was 4 digits with, a mix of unintelligible numbers, words, whatever the case, it would still be cracked instantly if it were only 4 characters in length. So as you go longer, right, you can then create a stronger password. I always recommend a passphrase, which is maybe a mixture of 3 random unassociated words with some special characters mixed in. The key piece is that we're not robots, right? We're not designed to remember a string of code, essentially. So what we often as people do is create what we think is a very long and strong password and then reuse it across all of our accounts. Well, that's not super helpful, right? If that account were to be breached or compromised, you accidentally provide that password, then you have to go through that habit of thinking about where else have I used it, and then it's a bit of a headache. So highly recommend unique passwords. So if it were ever the case where LinkedIn says, hey, we had a data breach and your password was exposed, you wouldn't have to then go through and think, okay, where else have I used it, especially for your financial accounts. How do we manage all of those different passwords? Well, we each have our own technology limits. Some of us may definitely want to look into a password manager. There's a ton out there. You can certainly do your research to see which one works best for you. Or, a lot of us may be a little bit less technically savvy. And one thing that we are able to do is protect physical items. So maybe it's, a note in a locked safe or something that you can more properly secure, right? We may not be aware of how to secure our computers, but we're very used to securing our wallets, for example. There's different risks and different, pros and cons to each approach, but what is a pro, right, is unique passwords across all accounts. And some of us know this, we don't always know how to implement it. When I made the switch, right, from a reused password, I just went about my daily life. And as I was logging into each of my accounts throughout my day, I stopped and thought for a minute, do I have the same password on this? Okay, I have that same one I've been using across all my accounts. Let me take the time to switch it here, load it into my password manager, add multi-factor, and then go on about your day. Otherwise, it feels overwhelming, right? The last thing that I will bring up before we open it up to Q&A is our client promise. And this is something that is super helpful when we start thinking about those what if scenarios where, we can kind of go down the rabbit hole as to all of the different cyber situations that could occur. Raymond James actually does have a promise in writing and in policy that states that we will reimburse you for actual losses in any of your Raymond James accounts due to unauthorized activity to a Raymond or unauthorized access to a Raymond James system through no fault of your own. So this is super helpful to think about to try to alleviate any of the concerns that you may have. If we do make an error, we do provide information, or there is some situation that occurs that is outside of your control, that we do have you covered, and we have extensive cyber insurance in place to make sure that we can back up this statement. So with that, I'll definitely open it up to any questions or anecdotes or any stories that people may want to share, and we can read them out loud and discuss. Okay, I don't see any open questions, but definitely if you think of one, one of the things, I'm certainly able to answer any questions if you were to send them to Camille, or if something comes up later, we can definitely address those as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. If there's no more questions, then I think that we are good to go. We are recording this webinar, so we will send that out to those of you who have registered for the webinar. So if you'd like to watch us at a later date, we can go ahead and do that. And I think that's about it. Oh, wait, it looks like we do have a question. Hold on.
Yeah, so there's plenty of password managers out there, some of which have been in the news recently for different, data exposures. So you definitely want to do a quick Google search to just make sure that you're comfortable with whatever the security is. Dashlane was one that we referenced on a previous slide. I think 1Password is another one. I think Dashlane may be up there, right, in terms of recommendations. We don't have, I think at this point in time, an official recommendation from a Raymond James standpoint, but I would certainly recommend typing in, top password managers. And there's a few articles out there that go through the pros and cons. Some are paid, some are free. I use a free one, and have weighed my own risk tolerance for that one. And oftentimes password managers are encrypted in such a way that even if there were to be a data breach, right, or if that password manager were to be targeted, the information stolen would be encrypted in a way that the cyber criminal would have to do extensive decryption to access any useful information. It would just essentially be gibberish. So that's a key feature of, I think, most password managers, but I would look into Dashlane. That would be one. LastPass is another that we used to be at the top of the list, but they've had some issues recently that, wouldn't be in good faith saying that that's the top one these days.
Awesome. Do we have any last minute questions? You guys can go ahead and type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on today. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much, Jessica, for giving us this information. It's definitely eye-opening and we appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Have a good one.
All right.